if you notice, there have been heavy southern storms and all that. So just to share with us how to be safe. So to avoid risk to life and property, to avoid taking shelter under metallic structures, maybe caravan and all that. We should do not hold metallic objects when there's thunderstorm. Don't use the mobile phone when it's raining because the electrical charge and all that. Then switch off your TV set. Most people have lost their electrical appliances because of that. And before you see all your sets, you just blow off and all that. Then stay away from transformers and electronic objects. Stay away from mirrors and glass objects also, because it's not good. Then avoid taking baths when there's lightning and thunderstorm. I try to take this out because we lost somebody in my office recently due to this thunderstorm, and the lightning came, and about 7 or 8 of them just fell down. I had the guts of one did not get up, and that was the end of that person. So it was so touching. Then in terms of security, don't leave home too early in the morning or late at night. This week, somebody left home very early, and it was a terrible thing. I don't want to go into that. The way I attended the event, this is very serious also. Most times we attend the event, we are with friends, we are drinking, we are eating, and maybe we'll step out to take a phone call or something, and we'll just leave our drink unattended to. You never can tell. Our enemies are within, they are not outside, so please be careful out there. At least one family member should know where you are, your movement. They should know you are moving from point A to point B. Tell somebody where you are. The country is very, very safe, in quotes, so we should be careful. Always pick your calls. People are they are fond of, you are seeing me or I'm there, why calling me again? You don't know what the person wants to tell you, whether to stay back or so. Please, so we should endeavor to stay safe. Thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Juliet. You cannot emphasize this more than this. It's very important to take safety as priority. So let's continue to stay safe and stay alive. So the next thing is to introduce our chairperson for today's technical and business meeting. And for this particular topic, we had to take some time to get somebody that is a subject matter expert, so that we could have a very technical collaboration and, of course, discussion. So the chairperson for today's meeting is Mrs. Miriam Yaya Shiru. She's the principal environmental scientist with NOSDRA. Miriam is a seasoned environmental scientist, geology with extensive experience in climate change, oil spill detection, response and remediation, gas flare tracking, and carbon capture and sequestration technology. Our expertise include environmental impact assessment, EIA, oil spill contingency planning, sustainability development, community engagement, livelihood development, as well as sequestration of carbon dioxide securely in the Niger Delta Basin. Miriam is a graduate of geology from the University of Ghana, Legon, and she has a master's degree in petroleum geoscience from the University of Manchester, United Kingdom. And she's currently a doctoral researcher on carbon capture and sequestration technology at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. She's a dedicated team worker, pragmatic problem solver with astute administrative skills. She's a member of the Council of Nigeria Mining Engineers and Geoscientists, that's COMEC. She's a member of NAPE, NMGS, and as well APG. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mrs. Miriam Yaya Shiru. Madam Miriam, you can unmute and speak.
Okay, thank you very much for the invite. And I'd like to say thank you to the presenter, who's also willing to show us what he has done so far, and for the sponsors of the technical session. Thank you for having us. We hope we're going to have a very fulfilling talk today. So I would like you to introduce, am I the one to introduce Mr. Derrick to the floor?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so Mr. Derrick Oyinebielador Odondiri. Please pardon my pronunciation. Mr. Derrick is a lecturer in geology department at the Nigerian Maritime University, Nigeria, and is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Southampton. His research interest is in assessing the integrity of carbon capture and storage reservoirs using an experimental and model approach. The research involves brine, CO2 flow through injection laboratory experiments, petrographic analysis to analyze geochemical and geomechanical changes of highly reactive rocks and fluids, emphasizing basalt and siliclastic rocks. Mr. Derrick Odondiri is a member of UK Carbon Capture and Storage Research Group. He is happily married with one child. Welcome, Mr. Derrick, and the floor is open for your presentation, please.
Thanks. So, Dr. Derrick, you can share your screen.
Okay.
Let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Miriam, for that introduction. I really appreciate. I also want to use this opportunity to appreciate NAPE and Warri for inviting me to present today as well, and also PTTF as well, which are also sponsoring my PhD. So they also have to be acknowledged as well. So today I'll be speaking on the potential of CO2 storage in basalt. I will be taking a case study from the CarbFix and the Wallula pilot projects. So as you've been told, I am Oyinebielador Derrick Odondiri. I'm a PhD researcher at the National Oceanographic Center. I'm in the University of Southampton in the UK, and that's my email address if you want to contact me after this talk. So some outlines of what we're going to talk about today. So I have an overview of CO2 storage in sedimentary and volcanic reservoirs. We'll talk a little bit about mineral carbonation, which is really important when it comes to reactive rocks like basalt. With the case studies from two pilot projects, which is the CarbFix and the Wallula projects. And at the end of the talk, the influence of my research to sort of enhance storage potentials and reservoir integrity for CCS sites. So this is just an overview of CO2 storage in basalt. We know the bigger aim of this is climate change and the storage of large volume of CO2 into deep geological formations. Basalt has been an ideal reservoir due to magnesium, calcium, and iron silicate reservoirs to form stable carbonate minerals. So we're looking at the potential from CarbFix and Wallula, and results from both projects have shown that there's great potential in CO2 storage in basalt. But now, what is the aim of all this? Now, the bigger aim of all this is global CO2 emissions. And since the industrial age, we have seen a sheer increase in CO2 emission from the 1970s up to 2021. We can see a sharp decline in the year 2020, and this was predominantly due to the pandemic. During the pandemic, we see energy usage was minimal. And post-pandemic era, we saw a 6% increase. And these CO2 emissions are due to the use of oil, natural gas, and coal, not limiting the electrical industry, cement factory as well. These are large emitters and contributors of CO2. Now, the continual use of fossil fuel will increase CO2 concentration in the atmosphere that leads to temperature rise, ocean acidification, and sea level rise. These are critical issues in our world today. We can see the droughts in Africa, melting of ice poles in the North Sea, gas flaring in the Niger Delta. Now, according to the Paris Agreement in 2015, it aims to reduce CO2 to about 2 degrees pre-industrial rates, and also to achieve a 1.5 degrees. And to achieve a 1.5 degrees, we have likely 25 years from now to achieve that. And currently there are different technologies to sort of ameliorate current rates of global warming, but the only realistic technology to achieve that is carbon capture and storage. So what is carbon capture and storage? Carbon capture and storage is a greenhouse mitigating technology capable of ameliorating current rate of global warming. This involves capturing CO2, greenhouse gases, transporting it and storing in depleted petroleum reservoirs, deep saline aquifers, basalt formation, deep or malleable coal seams, and also used mainly for enhanced oil recovery. Now, since the 70s, CO2 injections have been predominant in siliciclastic, or would I say sedimentary basins, including the Spleniet field. So before I even say that, now this is a global CCS map showing CO2 storages around the world. The Spleniet field is around here. This was the first commercial CO2 project. It commenced in 1996. And annually, it injects about 1 million tons of CO2 in the North Sea. We can see various CO2 reservoirs from deep saline aquifers, depleted reservoirs, and a lot used for enhanced oil recovery. If we look closer to Africa, we can see just 2 projects. The Insala project in Algeria, which stores about 1 million tons of CO2 in depleted oil and gas fields, and also, what's it called? 2 storage sites in South Africa as well. Now, if you take a look at sub-Saharan Africa, these are clear indications that we still have work to do. But there are still potentials here where we can also store CO2, and we've got the reservoirs to store CO2. So if we take a closer look at the Niger Delta, we can see various oil fields. Most of these fields have been exploring hydrocarbons since the 60s and the 70s. These reservoirs may in turn be potential CO2 depleted reservoirs for CO2 storage. Now, because our conversation today is tailored on the potential of CO2 storage in basalt, it's also key to look at its potential in Nigeria as well. And we can see basalt are predominantly in the southwestern part of Benue 12, around Cross River. That's the Afikpo Basin. Also, there are some basalts in the Anambra Basin. Also, a large chunk of basalts are in the Plateau Jos area along the Kachit Formation and the Kwagok Rock Formation. Also, research has also told us that there are also some basalt formation in the Cretaceous. Now, CCS, CO2 injections in any of these reservoirs. Now, when we inject CO2 in any of these reservoirs, be it siliciclastics or carbonates or basaltic reservoirs, there is going to be changes in stress, and we must understand the mechanical, chemical, thermal, and the hydrological processes. These coupled processes must be understood in every CO2 site. Now, when we inject CO2 in any of these reservoirs, what we see a change in stress, opening of fractures, induced seismicity, deformation of the rock. Now, in that same period, when we co-inject CO2 and brine, there's going to be a dissolution and precipitation reaction. So we'll see weakening and strengthening of the rock formation. Also changes in porosity and permeability as well. Now, how does that affect our rock sample? Now, does the porosity open new migration pathways for our rock? Does it clog our rock? And what's the influence of permeability? So these are questions in which we must fundamentally understand. Now, the thermal part of it, what's the influence of temperature with depth? And how does temperature influence chemical reaction during CO2 storage? The hydraulical part is there as well, the influence of capillary forces during CO2 storage. So a coupled understanding of these processes are essential for CO2 storage. So this is just an example of the geomechanical part I was talking about, the influence of stress and induced seismicity. Now, due to the buoyancy of CO2, when we inject CO2 into these reservoirs, due to pressure, there's going to be a fault and reactivation, and these might be possible migration pathways of CO2 up deep deformation. So induced stress, strain, and deformation. So these are critical to understand for every CO2 project. Now, trapping mechanism is also an essential part during CO2 storage, and this is mainly influenced on the kind of reservoirs we are working with. So, for example, we are working with a silicate, a sandstone reservoir that is that has both quartz and feldspar. When we inject CO2 into such
Go ahead, sir. She has muted. We are not hearing you, Dr. Derrick. You are muted, Dr. Derrick.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Now, let me come back again. So trapping mechanism is essential for any CO2 storage project. So you can see we move from a structural, stratigraphical, residual trapping, solubility trapping to mineral trapping. Now, this is influenced by our reservoirs in question. So I gave an example. If we're working with a siliciclastic, say a sandstone reservoir, and we are injecting CO2 into this reservoir. Now, these are not reactive reservoirs, and these reservoirs have got quartz and feldspar. These are not reactive minerals. So when we inject CO2, it's going to take millions of years in geological time to move from the structural and stratigraphical setting to the mineral setting. So to say, the savior of such reservoir is just the overburdened seal. And I explained before, when we inject CO2 into this reservoir, there's influence of induced seismicity, deformation of the rock, and this might in turn and leads to upward migrations of CO2 upwards, leading CO2 upwards. So when CO2 is injected, it moves from this structural phase and it moves to small pores, into small pores of our rocks, and these are residual trapping. When over time, when CO2 dissolves on groundwater, it turns to solubility trapping. But when it reacts with stable carbonate minerals, then we've got mineral trapping. And this is very essential for CO2 storage because it increases storage security. And it increases storage. So if you inject CO2 in a reservoir that is going to take millions of years from this to this, and if you inject into a reservoir that in few months you can achieve mineral trapping, I guess you will go for those reactive reservoirs. Okay. Now, one of the limitations of sedimentary reservoirs are they are less reactive due to the absence of calcium, magnesium, and iron cations to ignite these mineral carbonation processes. Like I said, it will take millions of years for CO2 to be trapped in these reservoirs. Also, this might not be a massive limitation, but now sedimentary beds around the world have the potential to store about 8,200 gigatons of billion metric tons of CO2. That's estimated potential, but conservative estimate is between 20,000 to 35 gigatons of CO2. For mafic rocks, that is basalts they cover 10% of the Earth's continental surface, seafloor, and mid-oceanic ridges. Every continent in the world, every country, you will find basalts. Most importantly, these basalts contain magnesium, calcium, iron, 25% of weight. And the storage potentials of basalts are between approximately 14,000 to about 128,000 gigatons of CO2. Now, current CO2 emission in the world is capped about 6.3 gigatons of CO2. So with just basaltic reservoirs, we can inject the entire CO2 that has been fled into the atmosphere. Most importantly, high porosity and permeabilities in this reservoir. So this is just one of my core samples, and this is a photo micrograph I made. See, from this photo micrograph, you can see a typical basaltic reservoirs with large phenocrates of olivine minerals, pyroxene minerals, and pyroclase minerals, and large pore space for mineral carbonation and fluid migration. So mineral carbonation, now this is where basaltic reservoirs takes their lead. Like I explained before, when we inject CO2 in basaltic reservoirs, because these reservoirs have got 25% of weight of calcium, magnesium, and iron minerals, immediately as they react with the co-injection of CO2 and brine, we move immediately from the structural and stratigraphical setting to almost a solubility trapping setting, because the calcium, magnesium, and iron does react with the cations, and we get a dissolution reaction. Now, with the right temperature, reservoir pressure, and setting of the reservoir, and due to the pyroxene, olivine, and pyroclase minerals, down deep the injection well, we are going to produce stable carbonate minerals. These are your calcites, siderites, and magnetite minerals. And these are dependent on reservoir depth. As we go down into higher formations, we might get anchorites and the rest. So this is very crucial. So now, how do we tie this understanding to the CarbFix pilot projects? So the CarbFix pilot project is at the El Shidi geothermal plant in Reykjavik in Iceland. It's an offshore example to validate the potential of in-situ mineral carbonation in CO2 in basaltic rocks. That's why this project was done. Now, the CarbFix site is situated about 25 kilometers east of Reykjavik, and it's equipped with a 2,000 meters injection well and 8 monitoring well. So we can see it's overlaid between the basaltic reservoirs and the yellow clay site. Now, CO2 was injected in these reservoirs, and they did something interesting. That's why this technology has been unique. In fact, this technology won in 2 places $1 million just a few days ago in the Elon Musk X Prize Climate Change Challenge, this CarbFix technology. So what they did, they co-injected CO2 and brine into about approximately 500 meters reservoir depth. Why did they do that? Usually because of the buoyancy of CO2, when they co-injected CO2 and brine, now CO2 is no longer buoyant. And immediately it reacts with the calcium, magnesium, and iron to form the dissolution reaction. Now, due to the absence of seismic, they used tracers to monitor the transport of the CO2. It also must be said that in this project, water is also very important. For this project, about 25 tons of CO2 was used to inject a ton of CO2 and H2S. And if you notice in this project, they co-injected CO2, brine, and H2S. Why did they do this? They did this because during CO2 capture stages, now the separation of these greenhouse gases is very expensive. So they co-injected the carbonic acid and H2S, and to understand the influence of impurities in these reservoirs. However, they got the result for the CarbFix process. About 95% of injected CO2 were mineralized in less than 2 years. In fact, current results from this field have shown in less than few months, CO2 is being mineralized from a supercritical stage to a carbonic acid stage to stable carbonate mineral. So as at yesterday, these projects have injected about 79,000 tons of CO2. Now, this is different from the Wallula projects. The Wallula project is identical, but one of the shared difference between these is in the CarbFix process, they co-injected CO2 and brine. And I did explain that sort of reduced the buoyancy of CO2. However, in this project, they injected supercritical CO2. This was injected between 2 brecciated zones of the Columbia River basalt along 800 to 900 meters reservoir depth. In this project, 2 years post-injection revealed that the presence of carbonates, minerals, anchorite nodules were found in the cores. Remember, in the other projects, they use a method to sort of calculate the amount of CO2 that has been mineralized. However, that was not done in this project. However, after 2 years of post-injection, there was no evidence of leakage. So we can see there's a massive potential of CO2 storage in basalt. And in my research, we are sort of further promoting that technology. So at the National Oceanographic Center in the UK, in the Rock Physics Lab, we've got a experimental rig, which is designed for CO2 storage. This rig is built specifically to mimic realistic conditions of CO2 storage. And this rig uses core samples between 2 centimeters of height and 5 centimeters diameter. So with this, okay, I think the next slide, I will be able to explain that. So with this rig, we can simultaneously measure elastic and transport properties of our samples in dry states before CO2 storage. This will encompass VPVS. We would understand the influence of velocity and effective stress, its attenuation as well. When we understand that, also the porosity as well. When we do understand that, and we see how the rock will react when we in dry state, when supercritical CO2 or the co-injection of CO2 or brine are injected in these reservoirs, then we will do a CO2 flow-through test. Now, this flow-through test will encompass the co-injection of CO2 and brine into the reservoirs. We will then measure the ultrasonic properties, that's the VPVS, the attenuations, the absolute and the relative porosities, the resistivity of the reservoir, the strains and the porosities. When we do understand that, then the elastic and the transport properties after CO2 injection. So it's in 3 stages. We try to monitor how the rocks behave within these stages. So just to add, so beyond that, we also do image analysis. So a typical core sample, we make photomicrograms of these core samples. And it's also good to be noted that for our basalt samples, you know, when you were given basalt samples to interpret, due to the reactive natures of the minerals, we are sort of focused on samples with high contents of olivine, pyroxene, and probably pyroclase minerals, more often olivine and pyroxene, and good porosities. If you look at this, this is an Indianbrite, but it was also called the basalt, and we can see it has loss of zeolites and biotites on blends. We don't need this sort of minerals because these are not reactive sort of minerals to sort of institute mineral carbonation processes. So we make thin sections out of these, and we sort of carry an image analysis. We measure the porosities, the effective porosities using the rig, and also the absolute porosity. So this is an example of our image analysis. We try to measure the pore phase and the reservoir phase of our samples. And when we do that, we can then theoretically sort of measure the porosities, the permeabilities of our samples, and also the reactive surface areas. Okay, I just added this because these are just ultrasonic wave measurements attached to our experimental rigs. These are pumps in which we inject our effective pressures. And now it depends on the rock in question. We either use a pore pressure transmission methods or a steady state flow method. Depends on the rock. So these are sort of inverse of Darcy's law. So if we have like a very porous reservoir, either basalt or or sandstone, we use steady state flow. If we have rocks that are not really very porous, we use the pore pressure transmission. These are for permeability calculations. And these are for our ultrasonic wave calculations for VP VS that's been attached to the experimental rig. When we get the results, we now process the results in MATLAB to achieve our compressional VPVS and attenuations. So some parts, like I said, what we also do to further this technology, when we measure our VP and VS and attenuations, we also tie those with our effective pressure. Usually before we start the process, I beg your pardon, I did not mention this, we sort of calculate the effective pressures of the reservoirs, the confining pressures, the pore pressures, and the effective pressure. That's the confining minus the pore pressure. Now we do this to understand how the rock will behave. So we see an increase in pressure is telling us, okay, that there are possibly microcracks in the rocks. And this will be done, like I said, in dry states, brine CO2 state, and after brine CO2 state. So this is our permeability calculations and its effective pressure. So it in turn tells us how permeable our samples is at different effective stress. So you can see most samples are not affected by permeability, but as pressure increases, you can see that they might be porous and they might not be porous. So we will sort of see how they behave at different effective pressure. So geomechanics is also very important, what we do. So from our VP and VS velocities, we also measure the bulk modulus, Young modulus, shear and portion ratio. This will tell us the stiffness of the rock, the deformation of the rock, and we understand how this rock would behave in different reservoir depth. So now, just taking us back to our earlier explanation, to just conclude, basalts are great reservoirs for CO2 storage due to high reactivity and availability. They're available everywhere. The recent pilot projects, the CarbFix and the Wallula projects, are clear indication of the success of this process. Now, there are issues now. Scaling from the field scale to an industrial scale is what we recommend for basalt. Also, transitioning from pilot to industrial scales will also create uncertainties, feedback loops between multi-phase flow, fractured control reservoir characterization. So like I said, we must have a fundamental understanding on reservoir characteristics, the coupled dynamic behavior among chemical, thermal, hydrological, and mechanical and geochemical processes. So computationally efficient numerical methods also very important. And also the effect of CO2 injection on geomechanics and how, like what I was doing, how does transport and elastic properties does affect these reservoirs and the influence of poor connectivity and reactive surface areas of our samples from an experimental base to a large field scale. So thank you so very much for listening to my talk, and I do welcome the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Derrick, for this awesome presentation. To be honest, it's no more news that CCS has been proven to reduce global emissions. And it's important that this technology is explored all over the world to achieve a net zero emission. Now, deploying this technology would require researchers to analyze the capacity, injectivity, trapping mechanisms, as you've explained, and also the storage security. I would say the storage security is the most important here, because we need to be sure that the CO2 we're going to be injecting will not be leaking in few years or several years to come, where will not be there anymore to check. So we need good analysis and researches to be able to confirm that what we're doing is right. Now, in this presentation, Dr. Derrick has taken us through the general interaction between the reservoir fluids and rocks, where the storage of CO2 as solid carbonates in basaltic rocks have been explored to assess the reservoir integrity. And considering that most storage reservoirs we know today for the purpose of CCS are basically sedimentary rocks like coal beds, deltaic and reservoir rocks, exploring basaltic rocks, as was done in this project, is really interesting. And he has done well by pointing out the numerous advantages, as basaltic rocks are better sinks than reservoir rocks. He also used two very interesting methodologies, which are the injection laboratory experiments using the CO2 experimental rig and the modeling approach to analyze the geochemical and geomechanical changes of the integrity of the highly reactive basaltic rocks when in contact with CO2. And it's also very commendable that Dr. Derrick have related this pilot project in Iceland and China to the Nigerian terrain. Considering the fact that there are ongoing strategic feasibility studies for development of CCS in Nigeria. So the use of our own basaltic rocks for such CCS purpose is also very important. We are able to compare the methodologies is used and for future researches here. So I'm hoping that the stakeholders that are able to join in today can see how this project can be useful and added to our future nationally determined contributions to achieve a net zero emission. I'd like to say thank you very much, Dr. Derrick, for this brilliant and insightful presentation. I think we've all picked up one thing or the other, and thank you all for joining. I'd like to hand over the session to the anchor, Mr. Ebenezer, for the question and answer session. Please, so if you have questions, you can either put it up in the chat or you raise up your hand and you get unmuted. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Yeah, we have a question from Johnson Ajida. Can you unmute and ask your question, please? Mr. Johnson?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you all hear me, sir?
Loud and clear. Loud and clear.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator and the presenter. We really enjoyed the presentation. My question is, being that basalt are readily available in Nigeria, you mentioned the Jos Plateau axis. Now, I want to ask, we have sedimentary basins more available, more widely spread in Nigeria than basalt. Should injectivity and the reactivity as the positive, should that be the only consideration for selecting basalt over reservoir basins? I mean, should the availability of basalt and reactivity of CO2 to form solid carbonate, should that be only consideration for selecting basalt over sedimentary basins?
Thank you very much, Johnson, for your question. One of the issues when it comes to CCS storage in any of the reservoirs is the ability to enhance security. And this in turn has have many environmental issues, and many environmentalists has queried the fact that because of possible migrations of CO2 from our reservoirs, contamination of groundwater, and upward migrations to the surface. That is why new research has tailored towards reservoirs that can capture CO2 in few months. So that is really very important. That is essentially important. Don't get me wrong, sedimentary reservoirs are essential. We understand the geology. These fields have been producing for the last few decades, which is really important. But in an environmental point of view, storage security, the capacity, storage potential, and capacity of basalt, currently it's approximately 140,000 billion cubic metric tons of CO2 potentials for just basalt, and for sedimentary is about approximately 9. So you see, there's a sheer difference between both of them, but reactivity plays a massive role, and reactivity is important because of storage security. That's what makes the basaltic reservoir stands out.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Derrick. So we have a lot of questions in the chat, but let's people that are raising up their hands speak. Then we'll go to the chat box. Mr. Marufdin, or is it Dr. Marufdin? Can you unmute and speak, please?
The professor.
Oh,
good morning. Good
Right.
morning, all.
Good morning, Prof.
Thank you, Dr. Derrick, for this wonderful presentation. I have a comment first, and it's a word of caution. The potential of that injection to cause to induce seismicity is a cause for concern. And that means it is very important to carry out a form of record to actually know where to carry out this injection. Especially seismic active zone has to be left out of it. So that is my first comment. Because you don't just accept a technology, hook, hold, and tinker without actually looking at the bad side of it. So seismic active zones, we have to be very careful because of the induced seismicity of this research or whatever. Then secondly, I have my question now. You showed us the model you obtained for the dry samples. Then what about what happened when this your sample gets saturated? That's number one. Then number two, how do you handle the upward migration of a carbon dioxide, those that are geogenic? You know, relationship between carbon dioxide and the radon. Some of these are geogenic. So how do you handle them? Because sometimes in one of your slides, you made mention that you couldn't use mass balance to solve certain aspects of the problem. That's a major challenge. So how do you deal with one when you have a saturated reservoir, and two, how do you handle the naturally emitted carbon dioxide, those that are geogenic? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for your questions, and first your contributions on seismic active zones. I think that was really good, because due to induced seismicity, it's also advisable we avoid such regions. And your second question was the influence of the saturated samples, if I'm correct.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
That's what they said. Yeah.
Okay. So why do we do that? We do that to understand how our sample behave, which is very important. When we inject CO2 in dry states, we understand the rock mechanics, how these samples will behave before CO2 injection. We understand that. Now, when we inject CO2 into the reservoirs, like I explained, there's going to be a dissolution and precipitation reaction. That in turn, when we move from a dissolution to precipitation reaction, we are going to create carbonate minerals in the pore spaces of our samples, and that might in turn clog our samples. So we must understand the porosity of our samples also before injection and after injection, how those influences the permeability of our reservoirs, because that is important. Also, during the precipitation of minerals, it's also quite confusing right now, because in other climes we think the reactivation, the precipitation of new minerals can also sort of increase the porosities of our samples. Also, they might also clog our sample. When we inject CO2 in our samples, our rocks will behave differently. So when we inject inject pure air into our samples in dried state, there might be an increase in our compressional velocity. We can see shear deformation or stiffness in our Young and bulk modulus. However, when we inject CO2, they will react differently. So those are very important for us to understand how they react in during different points of injection. And your last question, if I could remember, you spoke about mass balance calculation couldn't be determined to quantify CO2 mineralization. Yes, that's correct. Now, I can answer that question from the first one. Now, from the CarbFix process, now I did explain the co-injected CO2 and brine, so they did not do any seismic. So what they actually did, they sent tracers into the reservoir, and those tracers were able to evaluate the amount of CO2 which were mineralized. However, in the Wallula project, that was not done. So what they did, I think in a recent paper, they did geostatical models. So with the geostatical models, they were able to evaluate the amount of CO2 that were mineralized in that given period. So geostatical models were used to answer that question, sir.
I think there's a need to look into those carbon dioxide that are geogenic, to have efficient mass balance around that place. Maybe you have considered it as insignificant, but it's very key. There are directly carbon dioxide emission within the earth crust itself, and that should be taken care of as well before you be able to prior the injection. It is very key. That might be one of the sort of a problem with your mass balance. I'm just speaking loud. I'm just thinking loud.
No, I understand. You've got a point. You've got a point. That's why it's advisable. That's why we know to achieve net zero, we have to capture everything. We have to capture everything. So if we're able to do that, no, but for the mass balance, they couldn't quantify that because one, they did not send traces to sort of calculate the amount of CO2 that was mineralized in the Wallula project. Like I said, so they used a geostatical model to determine the amount of CO2. That's why in the Wallula projects, we don't have the amount of CO2 that was mineralized in the last, say, 6 years. However, in the CarbFix process, this is a data from us yesterday, 79 metric tons of CO2 has been injected since 2014. And they are currently using reactive transport models with geostatistics to evaluate future migration pathways of CO2s in the reservoirs.
Okay, thanks, Prof, and thanks, Dr. Derrick. So we need to go to the chat box. Then we have a question from Prachi Fai. Prachi, you want to unmute and speak, or I should read your question? They are quite interesting questions.
Just a minute. Yeah, wait a minute. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Prachi, we can hear you.
Yes,
Sorry, are you doctor or professor?
I'm a co-founder of CZ company. We are working on carbon emission on top level.
Okay.
So today my question is that what is the level of energy consumption? So I have already typed in chat box. So I would like to understand that.
the level of energy consumption.
Yes, exactly.
That is I did not really focus on that.
Okay.
But if you look at my first slide, this is just recent. In fact, this is last year recent CO2 emissions from relative energy, global CO2 emission related to energy. So we're talking about coal, natural gas, fossil fuel, cement factories, electricity, and the rest. And as at today, they have all contributed to about 36.3 gigatons of CO2 that has been emitted to the atmosphere. And I also did, okay, please.
Okay. My question is that what are the consumption of energy per kilogram CO2 captured?
What are the what consumption?
The consumption of energy per kilogram of CO2 captured.
Yes.
Probably be specific to countries and the terrain.
Yeah, I think because that's a massive. It would depend on what country or what maybe are we talking about fossil fuel? Are we talking about coal? Are we talking about natural gas? Are we talking about cement factories? What's in specific term, please?
Okay, Prachi, do you want to break it down, or we should go to another question? You also talked about.
I would like to know about energy consumption only. It's not any specific. It's not depend upon any specific country, because if we are working globally, if we want to work on a higher level, so in that case we need to understand each and every countries, because each and every country's atmosphere is different, level of things is different. So we need to think about in a global perspective. So do you have any specific answer, or how we can do that?
No, I think in lots of publications, there are thousands of information in the internet on energy consumption per sector. I think there are tons of information on that. I don't have the numbers in my head, but
Okay.
this graph does show you a cumulative energy consumption since the industrial age. That's where we've got 36.3 billion metric tons of CO2. Actually, in this presentation, I did not focus on per sector, but trust me, there are tons of figures online with that information where you can see the amount of CO2 emitted by sectors.
Okay, and what are the levels of efficiency in the capture of CO2 by each local of exploitation?
It depends on the technology. So for example, for CCS, there's an efficiency of 90%.
Okay, okay.
Yes, so there's an efficiency of 90% for carbon capture and storage. However, there are also, we have deforestation, there are other mediums. We have a mineral weathering as well, which is also a climate change and mitigating technology as well. So all those ones also have their sort of levels of efficiency, but for CCS, in which I spoke about today, there's a 90% efficiency.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And this was a nice presentation. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prachi. So we have Ovie Eruteya. Can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm on the bus, but it's kind of very noisy. Thank you for your presentation, Derrick. Last week in Geneva, I was looking at some core samples of basalt from Iceland also.
Oh.
And I noticed, under the Devon Up storage project, we plan to transport CO2 from Switzerland to store it in Iceland. So we have this collaboration going on. And I was just like impressed about your talk. And it's a new project. And the first thing I observed from the core samples and the core plugs was it's kind of heterogeneous. And the vesicles, the pores are kind of different at various depths. So how do you intend to solve this kind of problem when you are like modeling? So that's just my question.
Yeah, that's sort of currently I'm sure before you ask that question, you know that's currently a challenge with basalt. You see, okay, thanks for the question, Ovie. I'm sure you must understand that this is a massive challenge with basaltic reservoirs due to large vesicles and due to the heterogeneity of these vesicles in different reservoir depth. That till now is still a constraint for modeling. If we just oppose that with siliciclastic reservoirs, you won't find those you find those tendencies. So you can quickly just model, just do maybe a geostatistical model. But however, due to those vesicles in basalt, it is still a challenge currently as I speak to you. That's why it's even good to add this as well. That's why for basaltic reservoirs, you might also want to focus on reactive transport models. Because of you must add the reactive part, that's the thermodynamics, influence of pressure and temperature in your model. So you're not just, you are not just modeling to understand the influence of the vesicles, but you must do a reactive transport model. And this is also a challenge currently for basaltic rock. In fact, I saw a paper recently where they use vertical migration models. So you might want to have a look at that. But in terms of vesicle heterogeneity, that is a challenge today, and it's unfortunately more modeling has to be done to understand that. Also, okay, I can add this. Also, you can do if you take if you do a CT scan of your core samples, then you can do image analysis. Then you can sort of measure the vesicle heterogeneity of your samples using Avisio or Peugeot software. So then you can now build a 3D static model of your sample. So that might be a good way to go regarding the what's it called? Those tendencies with basaltic reservoirs.
All right, thank you, Dr. Derrick. We have Ovia, your hand is still up. You want to make a comment before we go to the next speaker? Sorry, we can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Can you hear?
Okay. Yeah, just
can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Derrick, for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. And all the best. Good luck. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So we have Ihioma Victory. Can you mute and ask your question, please? Ihioma?
Ihioma,
Okay.
can you unmute? We can't hear you.
Okay, let's go to the chat. We have another question related to what Prof. Maruf asked, still talking about fault reactivation, especially in seismically active regions. So, this person said, Olaleko said, how can we manage the potential leakage from fault reactivation and fractures caused by seismic movement, as you mentioned in your speech?
It depends on the reservoir in question, but the truth about it first, in any of this reservoir is modeling. So if it's similar to the question he asked. So if we model these reservoirs, we can sort of ascertain locations which we can avoid during CO2 storage. But you see, that's where basalt becomes more interesting. So with basalt, due to the reactive nature of the minerals in basalt, yes, there might be a fault active zone there. We would want to avoid it. But due to the rate of mineralizations in these reservoirs, it will take us in less than a year currently to move from that structural stratigraphical setting to stable carbonate minerals. And most of the things we worry about in our siliciclastic components can be avoided if we inject in CO2 reservoirs. However, if we are still focusing on, if I can go back to his question, modeling is just the way forward. So we can do a reactive transport model or a geostatical model to analyze our core samples and sort of avoid such seismic regions.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Derrick. Like I said at the beginning of this business meeting that the topic is an interesting one. And of course, a new technology will always have a lot of questions, as in what is how authentic that technology will be. But we believe that before the end of your research, you come out with a lot of answers to some of the questions that have been asked, and of course, everybody will be satisfied. Okay, let's take this last one before we go ahead. Okay, somebody said to effectively manage fault reactivation, I think we need to do a lot of stress and pressure analysis, including minimum ABD and maximum horizontal stresses. Yeah.
Yes,
Dr. Derrick, you talked about the geomechanics. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, of course. Yes, that's that's true. That's like if that's what I was speaking about in so with our experimental rig, the first thing we do, we try to measure the sort of the confining and pore pressures of the reservoirs, and with the influence of that, when we inject CO2, we can sort of ascertain the behaviors of these reservoirs during deformation, different stages of deformation. So we can get that done. But beyond that, the reservoir has to be modeled. When we do understand, like I said, if we do that in dry stage, if we understand the transport and elastic properties of our samples in dry stage, using our understanding the influence of our velocities, when we inject CO2, it will be different. There might be closure of most of those fractures by carbonate minerals. Then we must now model to sort of understanding the changes. So just having a preliminary assessment of the influence of our effective pressures and velocities, and theoretically doing our geomechanics is not enough. So that's just what I just want to add to what he did say. Yeah, so we must model. We must model as well.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Yeah, the modeling is important because you need to have an idea of what you cannot control in the subsurface.
Yes.
So that when you want to start injecting, you know how to tweak or just to move around those particular regimes or pressures that you have calculated. Very important. Thanks so much, Dr. Derrick. Can you please stop sharing so that I can share my screen, then we'll move ahead. Can we give Dr. Derrick a virtual clap, please? Confirm you can see my screen, please.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
All right. So at this junction, we want to call on the NAPE president, no other person than Dr. James Edit, F. NAPE, to present a plaque to Dr. Derrick Odondiri. Dr.
Thank you very
Edit.
much, organizer.
Yes,
thank
sir.
you very much. Let me say that on behalf of the Executive Committee of NAPE, the Advisory Council, and the Board of Trustees of NAPE, I thank you very much, the Warri chapter, for this very insightful and interesting presentation that you have put out here for us. Very interesting and enjoyable. And I am delighted that Dr. Derrick Odondiri has done an absolutely great job of telling us what we didn't really know about things like this. So thank you very much for this presentation. And let me seize this opportunity to present to you this plaque for your contribution to the activities of NAPE and for giving us an exciting and very rewarding presentation. Thank you very much. So that is, I don't know how you're going to receive this.
Yeah, we'll send it to him, sir. Yeah, we're going to send it to him.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sir.
So we'll still need you. You are going to give us a Google messages. Let's start from you, sir.
Yes, I am still here. And as I said, you know, I'm still standing on the protocol, and I'm doing this on behalf of the executive committee and the entire membership of NAPE, the fellows in attendance, and the emeritus members in attendance. I want to say that Warri chapter has been one of our strong chapters, and to bring this up, this topic, very apt, means that there is still hope in the sense that geoscientists will still have work to do, even when the energy transition has been achieved and people are talking about, oh, we are not going to be working oil and gas anymore. But well, geoscientists will always be needed all the way around. And my message is that the Warri chapter have shown the way, and very much thanks to the entire working team down there. Wilson, thank you very much. And for you and your team, making sure that this very interesting topic has been brought to the entire membership and other people of the NAPE family. Don't relent in this effort, and hopefully we want to see more of these sort of insightful presentations. So on that note, let me just say a very big thank you and keep it up. We are grateful.
Thank you so much, sir. We're also learning from you, because teamwork, they say, will make the dream work. So
Absolutely.
this is working because we have a team in Warri based on your encouragement to drive these feat. So we'll go to the next person that will give us the goodwill message, Dr. Anthony Ofoma F. NAPE. He's the Vice President for NAPE. Dr. Ofoma.
Yeah, thank you, Ebenezer.
Yes, sir.
Can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear, sir.
All right, thank you very much, Ebenezer. The president has said it all. I think my message would be this topic is apt at this moment, because that is what is the center or the key around the industry. CCS, carbon capture and storage. Dr. Derrick has done a marvelous job by bringing this to fore, but he went further to, say how it can be done, how you can, store these CO2 in a basaltic environment, which, I mean, it calls for further research. I want to thank Derrick very much. And I want to thank the entire ESCO of Warri chapter. These are kind of topical issues we want them to continue to explore and present to the NAPE and geology community. Once again, I thank everybody, NAPE, ESCO, Warri chapter, the national executive, the president, fellows, and everybody present in this presentation. Thank you very much, and remain focused, Warri chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Former. We appreciate it. So I will just take us through the announcement. You have most of them in the NAPE website. So we're announcing the NAPE 22 electioneering period is coming very fast. So for the elections, you have positions such as President-elect, General Secretary, Public Secretary, Editor-in-Chief, Financial Secretary, Treasurer, Assistant General Secretary, and Assistant Editor-in-Chief. Please, for nomination form, you can make inquiry from ebeyua.o@nape.org.ng. And also, if you are on this call and you are not a member of NAPE, we want to encourage you to join NAPE and also make it a point of duty to pay dues, because the dues are one of those things that make the association do what she's doing right now. So we need those membership dues to keep coming from you. And if you're an old member and you've not paid, please, it's very flexible now. You can do the payment online, very, very flexible. Within 5 minutes, you are done with your transaction. Those are the rates, those are the amount you we have to pay as members. Then also there's a short course coming up in May, 5th to 6th of May, 2022. And it's on the essentials of oil field mechanics. This is an important topic because in the presentation today, Dr. Derrick talked about geomechanics. It's good for us to come and understand what geomechanics is and see how it plays out in the life cycle of hydrocarbon. So it's going to be a virtual class. And of course, for members, you pay 20K because of the 75% discount. For non-members, it's 80,000. Student members, 5,000. Also 75% discount. And student non-member is 20,000. Please, you can make an inquiry more from Lawrence Uswagu. It's in the NAPE Secretariat, and that's his number down there. So the NAPE UAP and Women in Geoscience and Engineering are driving a book donation for geoscience. Book donation for geoscience for universities, and it's going to take place on the 15th of April. That started already to 31st of May 2022. So the book drop-off location is NAPE Secretariat. If you have any, please go there and drop your books, so that we can make our universities more equipped with state-of-the-art textbook and research materials. So NAPE Award 2022 award nomination opening. Nomination will close by June 30th, 2022. All this information, you can get them in the NAPE website, but for this award, please try as much as you can to do your nomination. It closes by June the 30th. Then announcing the 40th Annual International Conference and Exhibition, NAPE 2022. It's going to be kicking up on the 13th of November all through to 17th of November 2022. And the location is Eco Hotel and Suites, Victoria Island, Lagos. The theme is Global Energy Transition and the Future of Oil and Gas Industry, Evolving Regulations, Emerging Concept and Opportunity. And you heard what our president said. We shouldn't be afraid. There's always job for geoscientists and engineers, even in the midst of the energy transition. There will always be work for the geoscientists. Please, you can make more inquiry from Lawrence Uswagu, NAPE Secretariat. So in line with the annual international conference, call for abstracts and the sub-teams are what you've seen there, 1 to 7, the sub-teams. The abstract submission deadline, June 30th is the abstract submission. July 31st is the acceptance letter issuance, and August 31st is the full paper submission. Please, if you have a paper you want to present, please let's make it a duty to follow these timelines so that we can be given the opportunity to present and also do well. So for NAPE, we are active in social media. Follow NAPE on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and those are, and even Twitter. You can follow NAPE on those social media. So for those that don't know the NAPE Warri executive, these are the NAPE Warri executive. We have Mr. Wilson Song is the coordinator for NAPE Warri. We have Mrs. Temitayo Logo, is deputy coordinator. Mr. Lucky Iwu is our publicity secretary. And Mrs. Kemi Taiwo is the S official 2. Then Dr. Juliet is the S official 1. And Mr. Francis Ikogo is the financial secretary. And Ebenezer Bamigwe, the one speaking, the secretary. Please, if you have anything you want to discuss about NAPE Warri, or you want to get more information about NAPE Warri, you can meet any of this. So we're going to call on Mr. Elliot EBF NAPE, the president-elect, to kindly give us a vote of thanks. And because we've heard so much interesting thing about CCS, and I'm sure he has something to say. Mr. Elliot, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Ebenezer. Thanks all for attending this session. For the fellows present, thank you very much for your presence. The members of the Board of Trustees, members of the Advisory Council. I'm really elated to see the large attendance of the members of the National Exco led by our president, Dr. James Edet, FNAPE. Kudos to the members of the Warri chapter Exco led by Wilson. Great job, great job. Yeah, and I can see remarkable presence on various social media platforms. Your PopSec is doing a great job, I must say. Also want to thank the NAPE members for their presence. Thank you, Dr. Juliet Mudamine, for the safety moment. For the chairperson for this session, Mrs. Miriam Yaya, sure, also thank you for facilitating and guiding this session through. And also to the speaker, Dr. Derrick Odondiri, for his rather interesting and educating session on the potential of carbon storage in Basalt. I think it's an emerging technology, and it's heartening to see that there are a lot of Nigerians working on research around the world on this rather topical issue, and considering the potentials in the country and the depth of such technology in Nigeria. So we are hoping to see the results in the very, very near future. I just want to say thank you to all for attending again, and stay safe and enjoy the rest of the week and the long Labor Day and Eid weekend holiday. Thank you very much. Back to you, Benzer.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the vote of thanks. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this business and technical meeting for today. We'll still have interesting and fascinating presentation for the rest of the year. The one will be coming up May, and the advert will soon be out. Please, let's make it a date. Block your calendar once you see the dates. I don't know if Mr. Wilson has anything to say before we close for today. Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ebenezer. Thank you, every member of the ESCO and those that have been on the call. Thanks for your patience. So I waited up to this moment. We appreciate that. We won't take that for granted. And we are looking forward to having you again. You know, when we're going to be looking at something very, very interesting by next month, God willing. Thank you very much and have a great week.
Thank you, everybody. Madam Marian, thank you. Dr. Derrick, it's a pleasure. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's all for this month technical and business meeting for NAPE Warri, and see you next month, God's willing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for being on the call.
Thank you.
We'll see. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. ACC, I see you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, my president. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Wilson.
Thank you, sir. Nice.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Dr. Juliet, I greet you, man.
I greet you too.